English translation 247th contact. Sunday, 25th of July, 1993. 02 Yazor hours.
Greetings, my friend. Right at the beginning, I would like to say that I have very little time, and only came here to tell you what I found out about the American Lindbergh and the murder story about his child, which you asked me about during my last visit.
I am glad to hear that you were able to find out something about it. You also be greeted warmly. I am glad that you could come back so quickly.
Unfortunately, it will be a little longer until my next visit, because I will stay with my daughter Simya Se for a longer time. Probably I will not return until February 1994, when I will, of course, visit you.
Well, then tell me now what you could find out.
Lindbergh was the first person on Earth to cross the Atlantic into Europe in an airplane without.
I know the history of Lindbergh. What I want to know is whether the German-American immigrant Bruno Richard Hauptmann was actually the murderer of the Lindbergh child, and whether he actually kidnapped him, as has been claimed since that event. Hauptmann denied until his death on the electric chair on the 3rd of April 1936 that he was guilty and that he had never seen Lindbergh, his child, or his house, etc.
Our very detailed investigations are partly based on chronological records of the events at that time, where...
What kind of chronological records?
Records relating to our own archives.
That is good, because I do not want to rely on chronological records of Earthlings. So tell me, please.
Bruno Richard Hauptmann, the American immigrant from Germany, rightly asserted his innocence until his execution. He was indeed innocent, although a large part of the blackmailed ransom was found with him. His assertion that he had custody of the money only from an acquaintance who had given it to him in faithful hands was true in every detail. This acquaintance of Hauptmann was in cahoots with Lindbergh and received a lot of money from him to give the alleged blackmail money to Bruno Richard Hauptmann for the reason that it could later be found with him. This ensured that Bruno Richard Hauptmann could be arrested and charged as a child abductor and child murderer as a result of the forged, incriminating material, which in fact happened after Hauptmann was denounced. Thus, everything contributed to his being sentenced to death and executed, in conscious guilt of the American hero Lindbergh, who knew the actual murderer of his child very well, and whom he consciously saved from arrest and the electric chair by devising a deceitful and infamous intrigue against Bruno Richard Hauptmann, with the lie that his child had been kidnapped, when in fact he had already been murdered and hidden in the vicinity of the Lindbergh house. The murderess was Lindbergh's former fiancée, Elizabeth Morrow, whom he suddenly spurned one day because he liked her sister Anne Morrow better, with whom he subsequently became engaged and married. Elizabeth Morrow, Lindbergh's former fiancée, could not cope with this, and as a result she terrorized the entire Lindbergh house and its inhabitants more and more often with terrible jealousy scenes. And when the Lindbergh baby was born to her sister Anne, she sought by all means to kill it. Lindbergh and his wife Anne knew this, so they never left the child unattended with Elizabeth Morrow. One day, however, Lindbergh and his wife Anne were forced to leave without being able to take their child with them or give it to someone else's care, leaving it with Elizabeth Morrow. When Lindbergh and his wife Anne returned home, they were received by a distraught Elizabeth Morrow, who sobbed and confessed that she had murdered the child in a fit of jealousy by hitting his head on the tiles, shattering his skull. As a result of Lindbergh's earlier relationship with Elizabeth, and the fact that his feelings for her had still not gone out, and that she was also his sister-in-law, who was also loved by Sister Anne, Lindbergh's wife, the three made a joint decision to cover up the murder. It was decided, in common understanding, that Lindbergh, in addition to his lawfully wedded wife Anne, would in future recognize and treat Elizabeth as his wife, as requested by Elizabeth, secretly, of course, after which the police would be alerted and the lie spread that the child had been abducted, but had already been hidden by his own father in the vicinity of their home. The next consequence was Lindbergh's own intrigue, which for the time being was directed against someone unknown. Only through the acquaintance of Bruno Richard Hauptmann did Lindbergh then latch on to the German-born immigrant, who was a welcome victim for Lindbergh in order not to bring his Elizabeth into suspicion. So he devised a blackmail story together with his friend who was in bondage to him and to whom he gave a lot of money, handed over the alleged blackmail money to the friend, and ensured that Bruno Richard Hauptmann got into disrepute and suspicion, while the friend handed over the false blackmail money to Hauptmann for faithful storage, the end of which took place on the electric chair.
Unbelievable, but that is typically American. Here, too, it proves once again that America is not the land of blessing. When I think about what you and Quetzal have told me about the horrible machinations of the Americans since they have existed, then the horror comes to all my limbs. In America, it was not only the buffaloes, but also the Indians who were cruelly and inhumanly exterminated. But the world is as silent about this as it is about the criminal atomic bomb attempts of the Americans. The horrific experiments on humans with radioactively contaminated particles and medicines are also kept quiet. The fact that masses of invalids, paupers, vagabonds, prisoners, and even the inhabitants of entire villages and regions have been contaminated and abused for medical and radioactive experiments is also a matter of silence to the world, for it is always about America, which is allegedly clean, but truthfully so dirty and criminal, and which does not lag behind the Nazis of the Second World War and all the criminals of former Yugoslavia and other criminal states with any iota. The world is silent, so that America can be a big mouth and always stand there with a white vest, and where the criminal machinations of the Americans in Vietnam have not changed anything. There are so many who know all this criminal truth, but they are silent because they are afraid that they will be murdered by the CIA or other state organizations and killers.
This is true with every word, but you also endanger your life with your clarifications. The murderers and other agents, who are also sanctioned by the state, are not afraid to pursue their bloody criminal craft in Switzerland if they are ordered to do so by the government or the organization's rulers.
I know, but once I had to talk myself out of it.
But it must be enough now, my friend, because duty calls me.
Then I do not want to keep you any longer. Greetings, please, everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye, my friend.
Salome, but wait a moment. I was asked when the next major earthquake will be in California. Do you have any more information?
During our last conversation, I said that further predictions are pointless. But one last time, I want to give information. The next major quake with devastation, etc., and that will also cost a larger number of lives, occurs shortly after the middle of January 1994. But you should not make this unchangeable fact too public.
Sure, I will not make a Wassermannsite article out of it. On the other hand, it would not change anything, because all those who would be affected would not care about it.
That is right. Such predictions and advanced knowledge do not bring success, so it would really be pointless to continue making such predictions.
Understood. Nevertheless, I want to thank you.
Goodbye.
Take care. See you next February.